Yeah, I think we're live. It says streaming, so
All right. Welcome to the Critical Christian Podcast. We're your hosts, Dan.
and Justin. We ask we've only been doing this for a full year. Eventually we're gonna figure out how to do an opening. We ask critical questions about the Bible and provide mostly questionable answers. And today, we have the distinct privilege of doing like a recap on Genesis. We spent the whole year covering
It's
Genesis.
been the whole year. Yeah.
And so today we're going to go over say some of our highlights,
Mm-hmm.
redo or re-examine some of the questions that popped up as we were doing the study, and then maybe even discuss some sidebar topics.
Maybe.
I mean, we'll see when we get there.
We will.
It's just a recap episode. We don't have a script or anything,
Right. We don't.
so we're kind of freeballing it here.
Reading it off of our cuffs
That's right. Yeah, we're doing the cuffs.
by the seat of our pants.
That's right. Yeah. Well, shorts. I'm in shorts.
You are, but I'm wearing
The seat of your pants.
my pants. Yes.
Fair enough. You had some notes that you had written down
Sure did.
for Genesis. Would you like to go over some of those?
Sure. I'm going to try to read them in such a way that it sounds like they're not notes. Thinking about it.
Sure. Yeah.
All right, let me try this. So people see Genesis as the account of God's creation, which is to say how we came to be.
Like origins.
Like you said, oranges.
No. Only Trump said oranges. or origins.
My problem with this is that none of it was written by God. I mean, the only being that would know how the world. Now I know they say that Moses was, received divine
Revelation.
revelation. Of course, I think you and I don't even think Moses wrote it, so that's beside the point.
No, and the Bible never says Moses wrote Genesis or creation encounter. That's just historical tradition. There's no evidence for that.
I mean, the whole creation narrative, and even much or most of all of Genesis seems to have been a retcon of Jewish history, which is to say, they had no idea how they actually were created and needed literally anything. The problem I have with most Christians concerning the Christian story is that most come at it from the viewpoint that Genesis is true, and therefore they only introduce evidence favoring their case. I good?
I thought you were asking a question.
Oh, all right. Let's edit that out.
Oh, it's live, buddy.
Yeah. So the point is, like, objectively as a Christian, I think all evidence points toward Genesis being a myth or origin story, placeholder, whatever, for those who wanted to know their history but did not have any. Okay? I would love to discuss Genesis with a Christian who doesn't take it literally. For instance, who doesn't think Noah's Ark was literally filled with two of each animal? It's interesting, though, because there is literally no way that could have happened. I guess I'm just saying that I know we're here to ask questions about Genesis, but I don't know if I have any, because I feel like any question asked can be answered with, well, don't take it literally.
Either that or God did a miracle, right?
Yeah.
Those are the two cure-alls for the problems of Genesis. It's either an allegory or God did a miracle.
How can I debate people?
I don't know if you can debate people. I mean, even the early church, quite a few of them believe that Genesis was allegorical. You know what I mean? So it's not like you're the first person to think that maybe that's a more appropriate method of reading it.
This is just a modern interpretation now, that it's all factual.
No, I don't think so. There were people in the early church that thought it was historical as well. There's definitely a division. So, and that's like part of the problems with appealing to the early church is the early church fathers couldn't agree on anything just as much as we can't agree on anything today.
which is ridiculous. Thinking that you're starting a new religion and you can't agree on things. I mean, everybody's looking at the Bible as though it's the inerrant word of God, and yet by the way it was formed makes you think. I mean, as we've said, some of these books maybe shouldn't even be in the Bible, like Revelation.
Yeah, Revelation was actually pretty heavily disputed for a long time. It like got in by the skin of its teeth.
Yeah, and now that it's in, guess what? Forms the basis for pretty much everybody's idea of
Yeah.
the end times, if the end times are such a thing.
Yeah, could you imagine what people would think if Revelation didn't exist?
Yeah.
So many Christians have their like theology wrapped up in the book of Revelation.
They do.
But you'd still have a second coming. You know what I mean? That's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But Revelation does try to answer a lot of the afterlife questions that don't really get answered in the other books.
And I appreciate that. I mean, I think Revelation would be good if it were actually out the end time.
Mm-hmm.
But I know you and I discussed it, and it was decided probably.
Yeah, Revelation, and I didn't make this up. Scholars agree. Revelation seems to be addressing events that were all occurring in the first century,
Yeah.
and they believed that the end was nigh. Just like the book of Daniel was describing events happening in the 2nd century BCE, and they assumed that when they defeated the Greeks, that the end of all things would happen, and that the kingdom of God would descend from heaven. And then that didn't happen, so then they reinterpreted it and kicked the can down the road. But we don't really have those types of problems with Genesis. In fact, like the predictions in Genesis seem to be true.
Well, I mean, all the predictions are true just because they wrote them after the fact. So
Yes, that is
not entirely fair.
that is accurate for Genesis. We know for a fact that it was written after the events.
The only predictions in the Bible that they didn't write after the fact that came true seem to be ones that were written in such a way that they could mean a lot of different things.
Yeah, they're kind of elastic in their meaning and interpretation, or they're like really easy geopolitical predictions.
Mm-hmm.
Like sometimes when the most powerful army in the world is heading westward towards you, it's not hard to say, "Hey, the Assyrians are going to come and attack us."
Mm-hmm.
Right?
You wonder why people would write about that then, in a prophetic way.
Well,
Do they just want to be in the Bible?
no, I mean the prophecy in the ancient world. Every king had a handful of prophets, and they went to the prophets to divine the will of God. Right?
Yeah, but obviously, the only way you can really divine the will of God is if God wants it to be known to a certain prophet, right?
Yeah.
And you can't just be a king and say, "Hey, I'll take 3 random people," and then assume that they're going to be able to talk to God, right?
No, you have to test the words of the prophets to see if they're real prophets. That's Deuteronomy 18,
Okay.
right? They're not just trusting somebody to be prophetic because they say so. So definitely they're weighing the words of the prophets, and a lot of the prophets that we have in the Bible were just one of many. And the reason why they made it into the Bible was because they had a good track record of saying things that are true. Whereas the prophets that predicted other things, when those things didn't come true, their followers said, well, let's not collect these texts. We'll just let them die off like all the other failed prophecies. So that's why you see like Jeremiah and Ezekiel and things like that. You'll see their prophecies are fragmentary. Like you can tell that they were given in pieces that their followers had to later collect and edit into a body of text.
You're saying that they had prophecies that they weren't included?
Oh, that's almost a guarantee. Yeah, the prophets did not write these books. The prophets wrote individual prophecies, sometimes long prophecies, sometimes short prophecies, and then they were usually collected by the scribes and the other people that followed the prophet, typically after their death.
Okay, so why would some not come true?
Why? What
Why would some prophecies not come true?
are you asking from my opinion or from a Christian's opinion?
Christian.
Well, if you ask a Christian, they would say they all came true, or they'll come true later.
Okay.
So
And,
anything that hasn't come true will come true eventually.
and your opinion is just they were already written after the fact.
Well, the ones that do come true are either written after the fact or they're really easy predictions that anyone could have predicted.
Okay.
And there are literally hundreds of failed prophecies in the Bible. So I think the problem is that no one's reading the prophetic books to know the individual failed
The
prophecies.
prophetic, you mean the prophets? Nobody's reading the prophets?
Yeah, very few people actually take the time to read through the prophets.
Why would that be the case?
Because they're long, they're winded. They include lots of historical and geographic detail that nobody understands.
Hmm.
And so it's hard to read them and have a clue of what's even happening. So a lot of people don't read them. They'll read like, Jeremiah 39:11, the
Okay.
plans I have for you. They don't actually just sit down and read through the whole book. It's not typical.
We're gonna do that.
Yeah.
10 years.
Yeah. It only take us another 10 more, 10 more years to get there.
Yeah, I mean Exodus will be
Yeah, for sure.
all right.
Nah, Exodus is shorter than the Genesis. We'll get through it faster.
Think so?
I know some. I've read it.
9 months?
No,
10 months?
I have no idea.
Oh, all right.
Anyways, long and short
Yeah.
of it, let's
Yeah, let's get
focus
into,
on Genesis here.
I know it's really easy not to though.
Yeah.
The Bible is a big book.
It is a big book.
All right, let's get into your questions. All right.
Oh, you don't want to finish your notes?
I just had a bunch of comments about.
You sound really enthralled right now. You're like you're really excited about doing this.
Yeah, I just couldn't. Oh, I just couldn't think of, any good questions because it just felt like anything I had a question for would be answered by, oh, that's because it's. You know what I mean?
What do you mean?
Well, just like Abraham. I mean, we agree Abraham wasn't real, right?
I don't believe he's real, but I mean some people do.
I'm glad for them, but obviously, I mean, Abraham, at least the name can't be real. So either he's an amalgamation of different people, or he existed, but it's greatly embellished.
It does seem unlikely that Abraham's real. Where are you going, buddy? The kitty doesn't know what he wants. As soon as you let him out, he's going to scratch on the door to come back in. Okay. He's going to be back in 5 minutes. We're live, right?
Oh, he didn't want to go out. He just wanted the door open.
I know.
Okay, sorry. What the cat wants.
So anyways,
Yes.
you were saying something. What were you saying?
Abraham.
Yeah, he didn't exist most likely. In
Right.
fact, as we discussed earlier, when we first started this, like most of the early stories in Genesis,
Well, all of them.
well, yeah, maybe, they appear to be mythology, which is evidenced by the fact that everybody's role in the story coincides with the meaning of their names.
You should read my notes later.
I know you're smart.
Read them anyhow.
Yeah.
But they're just really boring.
Yeah. Can you talk into your mic?
Oh, okay.
You see how that works?
Yeah, a little better.
Not into the tip. There's no microphone in your tip. There you go. In the front.
That's a weird way.
I've got a tip. You've got a front mic.
I have the whole.
Yeah. Well, you don't want to take the whole thing in.
No.
Anyways,
That's too much. All right, let's change that subject.
so let's
So-
actually talk about Genesis.
All right, Genesis.
Okay.
I'm
So
excited.
First question: who or what is the snake in the garden?
All right. Well,
I know. Don't worry about the cat.
all
We're
right.
live streaming.
Yeah, but I bet they have cats too. All right. So there are obviously the answer is to say it's Satan. However, I'm not sure if outside of Job we have proof that Satan is a character in the Bible. I don't know. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, there's like 3 passages maybe in the you're gonna stretch that cable right out of the computer if you
I'm just
keep yanking on it.
okay. I'm just trying to make it may sound better.
I know. I appreciate that. Um, that is correct, though. We don't really have a whole lot to go by suggesting that Satan was an individual entity as much as Satan was just any type of divine adversary.
Yeah, I mean, everybody now it's God versus Satan. You know what I mean? Whenever you do something wrong, it was Satan. Whenever something bad happens, it's Satan. And if you look in the Bible, he's not really. And I mean, the snake probably was. I mean, might have just been like a demon or what have
Well, and the snake is never even called an angel or an adversary.
you. Well, it speaks, right?
Well, it does speak, but there's a
Well,
donkey that speaks in the Book of Numbers. So
okay. Well, okay. Well, it was trying to get them to disobey God, so
right, no, I
it can't be a good thing.
I didn't say it's a good thing. I'm just saying I think it's just a snake. What I'm saying.
Huh?
Well, does Satan crawl on his belly?
I mean, it wasn't just a snake. Obviously, someone was like inhabiting it.
No, I agree. Either something was inhabiting the snake, or the snake had a different capability, a different set of capabilities before the fall.
Before the fall, it was able to speak
Yeah,
and be
yeah,
have like a human brain.
yeah.
See, that doesn't.
God created the animals to be a companion for Adam. Remember?
Well, yes.
And remember when Genesis chapter 3 happens and the curse is given? The snake is cursed to crawl on its belly and to eat dirt,
Right.
which has nothing to do with Satan. That's what snakes do.
I know, which is just ridiculous.
Well, I just think it's an explanation for why snakes are the way they are when all the rest of the animal kingdom is quite different.
There's a lot of weird animals there, right?
You think the authors of Genesis knew that?
I don't know.
They lived in the ancient Near East. They knew maybe 25 different animals.
Oh, you think so?
Yeah. They don't know about penguins. They don't know about giraffes or.
Oh, so they needed a reason to explain a snake?
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. There's the origin story of snakes goes back like eons into ancient Near Eastern history. Snakes are always kind of like the like mortal enemy of mankind because they're tricksters. They're sneaky. They come upon you silently and attack you without you even knowing it.
A lot of animals could do that.
Not like the snake. When was the last time you heard a snake?
Not too often.
Yeah, most people don't see a snake till it's about to attack them.
Yeah.
I know, right? And even in Gilgamesh, remember it was the snake who stole the plant of immortality from.
Well, obviously, I remember Gilgamesh.
Right. And to say that Genesis isn't copying from Gilgamesh, I think would be ludicrous. The
Right. Yeah.
first 11 chapters of Genesis all have Babylonian parallels.
And surely the audience at the time had read Gilgamesh and would have seen the parallels, right?
Well, hell, at the time this was written, it's possible they were in Babylon. You know what I mean? That's why so many people will think that these chapters were written with Babylon in mind. They're written against Babylon.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they were arguments.
To say like our God is better than yours, right?
Yeah, this is how it really happened.
Mm-hmm.
You say this, but we say this.
And yet inside they're like, but we both know none of us are right.
Oh, I don't know. They probably did think they were right. It's hard to say. It's hard to say what was in the mind of the ancient Israelite.
It is, yeah. So you're thinking that back in the day, snakes were sentient.
Well, I'm saying according to the Genesis narrative, that's kind of what it was saying. And if you read Babylonian literature, animals have these type of capabilities all the time. It's very normal for animals to carry on a conversation in Near Eastern mythology. And remember, God says, "Cursed are you among all the wild animals." Right? So he classifies the snake as an animal and then curses it as an animal.
Mm-hmm.
It's not until you get to like the New Testament era that there's like this idea that the snake is probably Satan, right? Seems to be like a later invention that's superimposed on top of it.
I mean, is it possible that it's just, as you said, a story from Gilgamesh
Mhm.
that they were co-opting, and so it's not Satan, or uh, it's just nothing. It's another story.
Yeah, it could literally just be mythology, not meant to be taken literally.
Well, then the question would be, was it meant taken literally? Did they take it literally back then? I'd love to know what they believed. I mean, now apparently all Christians believe all things in the Bible.
It's hard to say because so much of Genesis chapter 3 is designed to explain why things are the way they are.
Mm.
Like, why do women have painful childbirths? Why do we have to work by the sweat of our brow to create food when God made the planet for us?
Right.
You know what I mean? All these strange questions. And so Genesis 3 is kind of answering these questions. Like, well, the reason why these things are is because of what happened in the garden, you know? Um, because at some point, you know, in the ancient mind, you would think, hey, we're here. God put us here. Isn't it odd that like it seems so hard to
Right.
survive?
Yeah.
Like, is that congruent with a God that is like really loves us, you know? And so you gotta square that story up somehow.
Right. So they're just trying to find answers for all the Israelites who are questioning the God, right? The God, right?
Mhm.
But then my question is, do the Israelites read this and go, "Oh, okay, that's fact now." I mean,
Possible that some of them did. We know some of them did because the New Testament authors thought it was all literal.
did people believe Gilgamesh was real?
Yeah, some did. Yeah. I mean, just like right now, you have people that read religious literature and they think to themselves, this is shouldn't be read literally. You had the same thing in the ancient world. Obviously, people have always been a little bit divided on how to interpret texts. Yeah. Next question though, was like the whole snake in the garden and eating of the fruit, was that a setup?
By God
Yeah.
to make them fall?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't. I mean, I don't think it was a setup. You know. Aw. You know, it's just.
Is God all knowing?
I mean, obviously, but
Okay.
I mean, I think we've also mentioned that just because you know something's going to happen doesn't mean that you made it happen.
Well, I think that's different though, right? So if God was all knowing
Yeah.
and he knew that if he put them in the garden and he put the tree there and then he put the snake there, he would have known that they were going to fall. Now, did he have the power and the capability to do something else?
Presume so. I mean,
Sure.
I have to assume everything. Just have to assume everything is part of an overarching plan, you know?
Well, that's what Paul would say, and that's what he says in Ephesians chapter 1, right? But I think it's all set up. And I think that's you can just come to that conclusion using basic logic, right?
Okay.
So, like, if God was all knowing and he had the power to do it differently, but he chose to do it this way, it means the way that things went down must have been the way that he desired them to go down,
And I mean, they probably are.
right?
I mean, he wanted people that had free will, right?
He wanted people to have free will, it would seem, except if you read like Isaiah and Paul, they would say something else.
Well, whatever they're saying, they're incorrect. So
Right, yeah. So if you take away the New Testament and take away some of the latter prophets, I don't think you come up with the idea of predestination quite as readily, except that in Genesis it's clearly there. But even in Genesis, you can wipe some of that away and say, well, you know, even though God orchestrated Joseph going into Egypt. That's not to say that he's orchestrating everything that ever happens.
Right.
I think,
Yeah.
right. But did he orchestrate the garden? I kind of have to believe he did.
Well, I mean,
Because he could have chose not to put the snake there.
well, yeah, but say he chose not to put the snake there, but maybe the snake was some other entity.
Right, but God created all things,
Yeah, but
including the snake.
oops, sorry. I know, but then you just get into all sorts of crazy stuff, where everything is God's fault.
Well, I'm not saying. Well, it depends on if you're reading the New Testament or not. But I'm saying this particular story, though, God could have not created the snake,
I know.
but he chose to create the snake.
I think he chose to create whatever the snake was, but then the snake decided all by itself to do what it did.
Right, but did God know the snake was going to do that?
That doesn't matter.
Well, it does.
No, to me it doesn't.
But it should.
No, because just because you know something's going to happen doesn't mean you.
Right.
I'm just saying, free will is a pretty big part of why why we exist. I mean,
Well, we don't. Well, I think free will is a different topic. We're just questioning whether or not God planned for them to eat the fruit. And
yeah, but that was the only way for them to get their fruit.
well, I don't think so. You can have free without Satan.
Yeah,
The only thing Satan ever did was tempt them. They
but,
still had to make the decision using their own free will. And they could have had that decision and their own free will without Satan.
yeah, I don't know.
Right.
I'm good at debating.
Well, I'm just saying that if God knew that Satan was going to trick them,
Yeah.
and he chose to make Satan anyways, and he chose to put Satan in that position,
Mhm.
we kind of have to assume that Satan was basically doing God's dirty work.
I appreciate that, and I hate to bring this up, but that would be a lot like saying that God made Hitler and God knew what Hitler was going to do. So, God made Hitler do his dirty work. Obviously, that's ridiculous.
Well, not
That's
necessarily.
the same exact thing.
No, not necessarily. We can say that God orchestrated this situation without saying that he orchestrated every situation.
Why? I mean,
Because in order to accept the latter proposal, you would have to assume that every person that's ever been created, God chose to create them. But that doesn't seem to be the case.
Right, it does not.
That seems to be human free will. We chose to have sex with each other and procreate, right?
Yeah.
Now, there's obviously you'll find different answers depending on who you ask, but I think if you do believe that humans have free will and we are the ones deciding to create, then that gets God off the hook for the wickedness of mankind, because he didn't create every individual alive, but he did create Adam and Eve, and he specifically created the snake. So the garden, as far as I can tell, appears to be a setup that was necessary to put things in motion. That makes sense?
I believe that. Okay.
Right? I'm not saying that God wanted evil things to happen.
Yeah.
But I'm suggesting that if you take Paul's letters seriously, that Jesus was slain from the foundation of the world, then you kind of have to conclude that Jesus was always in the forethought. He was planned from the beginning. And if Jesus was planned to die from the beginning, then you have to introduce sin into the world one way or another. And you could wait for it to happen, or you could induce it.
Yeah, I mean, because Jesus is part of the Trinity, right?
Theoretically.
Theoretically part of the Trinity, and so he would have been there from the beginning.
Except that God didn't have a beginning, so it's kind of a...
Yeah,
but it's hard to talk about it without using that kind of phraseology.
Right, we can't grasp that.
So those are some thoughts on the garden narrative. I chose not to write down a bunch of anachronisms because I feel like we could fill up a whole episode with anachronisms.
Well, a couple episodes, but yeah.
Right, because there's so many in Genesis.
Yeah.
But I do want to talk a little bit about the mark of Cain.
Okay.
We could not actually come up, if I recall, like a good answer to like what
Right. Yeah.
the mark of Cain is. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And I still don't really have a good answer. I think the closest we can get is there's a passage from Ezekiel in chapter 9.
The foreheads. Bam.
Yep, yep. And he said to him, "Go throughout the city of Jerusalem and put a mark on the foreheads of those who grieve and lament over all of the detestable things that are done within it." As I listened, he said to the others, "Follow him through the city and kill without showing pity or compassion." And so basically, in the book of Ezekiel, God's instructing the people in Jerusalem that are still righteous to be marked
Okay.
for not being slaughtered. So the people who get the mark on the head are the people who grieve over the detestable practices that are God's people are doing, and then those without the mark in the city are going to be killed. But that so like we have a precedent for it at least somewhere, but it still doesn't answer like what it is.
Right.
And I can't think of any, and maybe I'm just not thinking in my memory bank deep enough, but I can't think of any ancient Near Eastern text where somebody had their foreheads marked. You
Oh,
know,
okay.
like even when you branded a slave, you wouldn't brand them on the forehead.
I like cats.
I know.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's interesting you should put that because that basically means that at least this story isn't taken from another myth.
That's true. This seems to be like authentic.
Yeah, that's actually kind of interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Although we still have to ponder like how many people were on the earth that would have tried to take vengeance against Cain when he was theoretically one of like two or three people,
Yeah.
four people that are alive.
But I mean, I'm sure they're going to have a lot of babies and word's going to get around. And
Yeah, I think so.
you know what I mean?
Well, oh, excuse me. If he lives for a couple hundred years,
Yeah.
it's a little bit of a guarantee that somebody is going to come along and be like, "Hey, you did this thing."
Mm.
But the way the passage is worded,
It seemed as though there were other people around at the time. Yeah.
yeah, it kind of makes it
Definitely.
seem like there's other people.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the flood.
Sure.
I think we did come up with some answers on the flood. Why did God flood the earth?
Because everybody was wicked.
Yeah, and what was the other possible reason?
Well, the one that is obviously not true is to kill the Nephilim, right?
Yeah, the Nephilim, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't buy into the Nephilim thing. I get it. I understand that it was popular
Yeah.
in Jewish history, but it seems unlikely to me that because even Paul talks about how the heavenly beings have a different sort of flesh,
Okay.
right? So we would have to assume that the angels like took on mortal flesh, but like are angels just like shapeshifters? Like it's so weird to think that angels like have that type of power.
I mean, angels look very similar to humans already.
Well, yeah, theoretically,
No, not theoretically.
but what kind of
According to
bodies do they have that they're able to mate with women? I mean, and that's the other problem when we discussed this earlier. Like, if we assume that they were lusting after the women, even from heaven, which
Mm.
appears to be what happened, then like we're kind of forced to assume that they had like some sort of physical body where they had hormones and chemicals and could lust.
Yeah, my problem is growing up, angels were always talked about as though they were kind of mindless,
Mhm.
just an army of followers. And that's why humans are special because we actually have free will and blah, blah, blah. And now
Yeah.
I'm like, what's the difference between humans and angels?
Not
I don't
much.
know. Do we become angels when we die?
I mean, according to the New Testament, that is theorized by Jesus. Yeah, we become like the angels. Um, but then that would answer, or that would beg the question, like, okay, well, if we just kind of become like the angels when we die, then what's the point of us being here?
Yeah,
Like,
because
what's being accomplished?
the angels didn't need to do it first, right? Or did they? Maybe there were no angels until Adam and Eve died.
Maybe. I don't know if that's true,
No, I'm just saying.
well, there is seraphim,
Yeah.
because there was seraphim blocking the entrance to the garden.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
With a flaming sword, which is interesting since they hadn't invented metallurgy yet.
that's right. I don't really know what angels are.
I don't think the Bible really tells us what they are.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we have a lot of mentions of angels, but every time they're mentioned, it's still like relatively ambiguous. Like
Yeah,
even in the Psalms, at one point, it talks about them having food to eat.
yeah. Well, I mean, they eat in Genesis.
Yeah, they do. They eat real food in Genesis. Like there's so many questions. Every time they angels appear so far in Genesis, they appeared to be like more like men
Yeah, they're mistaken for humans, right?
all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's wild. Yeah. About the flood though.
Yes.
According to the narrative, King Og survived the flood. Because that's how, remember, the Nephilim were supposed to all be killed in the flood,
Okay.
but then Nephilim existed after the flood.
Yeah.
Yeah. How did King Og get through all that?
Well, you said that he latched onto the boat and kind of sailed along,
Yeah.
lived off of barnacles or something.
Yeah. I don't know if that's what happened, but that is what the Jewish rabbis used to teach. The alternative hypothesis is that after the flood, the angels just did it again.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. There's probably other ways to square that up, but I think those are the two most popular ones.
Well, we said that it was carried by the gene was carried by the women, right?
Well, so that was another theory, which is well, the gene could have been carried through Noah's family,
Yeah.
but through the women,
Right.
and you wouldn't tell because the women didn't have the gargantuan size that the men did that had it.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It seems to be a little bit dubious. I don't really know because we're not. We don't, because Noah was picked because he was righteous. In fact, in chapter 6, they say that Noah is tamim in Hebrew, which is the same word that you would use for like a spotless lamb, tamim.
Okay.
So like Noah and his family was saved. Are we to assume that the rest of the family were as righteous as Noah?
No.
I don't think so. But did Noah sin when he got drunk?
I mean, the hard question on that one.
Right.
Is it a sin to get drunk?
Right.
I mean, in my opinion, yes.
Right.
But in the Bible's opinion, I don't know. Jesus drank, but he never got drunk, I don't think. So I don't really know if it's a sin or not, but I don't know what the relevance of your question is actually.
Well, what I'm suggesting is that, like, if it's a sin to get drunk, but Moses could still be, Noah could still be described as like a righteous man.
Well, everybody sins.
Exactly,
Righteous
right.
or not.
That's what I'm saying, right? So if Moses can do those types of things and still be considered righteous,
Yeah.
I said Moses again. I mean Noah.
Yeah.
I meant Noah. If he can do that, then is it possible that Noah's family members, that their sins can be rationalized the same way that Noah's sins can be rationalized? Like, can we still say that they were righteous people even though Ham clearly did something unrighteous?
It doesn't matter at all because God wanted Noah.
Right, but if we assume that Noah's children weren't all righteous, then we have to assume that God saved both the righteous and the unrighteous.
Which, well, I mean, he did. I mean, with Lot, right?
Right. So if he was saving the righteous and the unrighteous,
there was no reason for flood, right?
Yeah. Then
I get
where do
it.
you draw the
I
line?
get it.
Right. It's just kind of odd.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the whole idea of the flood is ridiculous. So,
Yeah. Was it
it,
global, you think?
well, obviously, I mean, I was going to say obviously it couldn't have been, but then I think of things like the Grand Canyon.
Oh, sure.
I mean, that thing either took millions of years to make, or did they say they could replicate the results a lot more? Yes, they did. That they could replicate the results
Uh,
with
Have
a
they ever done it?
with a ton of water.
No, that's a claim
Uh
made by like Ken Ham goofballs.
huh.
That's not something that's ever been
Well,
replicated.
obviously you can't replicate it, but I'm just saying theoretically
Yeah, it's a theoretical hypothesis.
is that may have been what it would have looked like with that much water that quickly.
I actually don't. I've read the like answers in Genesis type of response to this, and I don't find any of that to be convincing. And I don't know any educated Christian who takes that seriously.
Is it a
Um,
personal attack right now?
not a personal attack. I'm just saying that
Yeah.
I've never met a single like person who was into geology that believed that if you had enough torrential rain and flooding that you can just create a Grand Canyon. Especially because remember, the water was only on the earth for probably a year. Was it like
Yeah, but there was a
371
lot of it.
days? There was a lot of
A
it.
lot of it.
Yeah, but for the majority of that time, it would have just been submerged.
Right.
There's no currents.
Well, I don't know
It's
how.
just like being in a bathtub.
I don't really know how.
Like there's no erosion in like the water currents in like the bottom of the ocean, right? So uh, it would have only been able to happen if there was running water over the surface of the rock. Of course, that only would have happened at the very beginning and the very ending of the flood. In the middle of the flood, everything would have just been submerged.
Well, what are you suggesting that the Earth has been around for millions of years?
I think so.
Anyhow.
So that's why we have dinosaurs as well.
Oh, yeah, right.
I know you don't believe in
I
dinosaurs.
do not. I really like the young Earth hypothesis, to be honest.
I know it sounds good, except that there's no evidence for it.
Well, I mean, according to the Bible, there's evidence for it.
Right.
You know what I mean? If you start with when God created the Earth or whatever.
Yeah, like 4,000 BCE.
Right. That sounds really good to me.
It sounds good, but again, all the evidence points to the contrary.
Yeah, I know, but all the evidence is circular. All right, what's next?
Okay.
Yeah.
So, next question. I don't know if this is a question, but some of the similarities of the flood stories.
Well, I mean, the reason for that is because I mean that's more proof that it's real. Obviously, if all different, I mean, like all different cultures had similar stories. I mean, like the Chinese did they have flood myths?
Yeah, I mean, all throughout the globe, you've got like regional flood myths.
Which means something happened.
Well, no, because they're all at different time periods, and they all describe the events differently. And
Well, are they all at different time periods, or are they all in the past?
both.
They
You don't tell about the flood in the future.
Well, no, I mean they're all in the past, and so if they're in the past, nobody really knows when they happened. So they could have happened at the same time.
Well, I don't think so, because like in the Sumerian flood myth,
Mm.
I mean, that flood myth basically, if you date it, happened like probably before Adam and Eve existed on the biblical timeline.
And how would you do?
You wouldn't do it.
Huh?
The timelines don't match. Is what I'm saying. The ancient Sumerian timeline doesn't match the biblical timeline.
Oh, why? Because you think the Sumerians were around before Adam and Eve?
The Sumerians and the Egyptians, according to archaeology, were around long before 4000 BCE. Same with the people living in Anatolia. We've got two archaeological sites in Anatolia or Turkey that have been positively dated all the way back to 12,000 and 11,000 BCE. And we've got other
As I said, it's all circular dating.
It's not circular.
I mean,
That's
none
how
of
dating works.
No, that is how dating works.
Carbon dating.
Right.
Yeah. Do you know how carbon dating works?
I don't have to know how it works. I read somewhere.
Yes.
Something.
And when then we take the carbon dating and we compare it to the tree ring data and we compare it to other things, and when they agree, we say this is an accurate date.
And when they don't agree?
Well, then you don't say it's an accurate
Exactly.
date,
Right.
except that we have data from the ancient world. We know when these sites were existed in history.
I mean, maybe,
We
but
do.
maybe, but
We do.
maybe. Well, what's your point?
Well, my point is archaeology suggests that the the civilizations that we read about predated Adam and Eve altogether.
Well, that's impossible.
No, it's just true.
I mean, it's impossible, but I get you. I mean,
Well, it's not impossible.
if the Bible says Adam and Eve were created as the first humans, you can't really have people before them.
Oh yeah, I can.
How?
Either it's an allegory or it's just not true.
Well, it's gonna have to be an allegory then.
Right. I get that. Right. And it's okay. Most Christians would say, well, archaeology is just wrong.
Yeah.
And that's okay if you have that position. That's not my position, but that's okay if it's everyone else's position.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, but some of the interesting parallels of the flood myth with the Gilgamesh edition,
Yeah.
I think just kind of fun to go over. I don't really have any comments on it,
Okay.
but there are so many. I think it might be interesting for the people listening.
All right.
So, in both Gilgamesh and in the Genesis epic, the flood is global.
Mm-hmm.
In both stories, the reason for the flood is the wickedness of mankind.
Now, how far before Genesis was written was Gilgamesh written?
About 3,000 years or more.
No. Okay. Really?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, Genesis most likely was written in the 6th century BCE, and the Gilgamesh epic goes, we can date that all the way back. Actually, 3,000 is an overshoot. We can date the Gilgamesh epic easily back to 2,000 or to 3,000 BCE.
Okay. So that still aligns with the young Earth.
Hmm. Yeah, the Gilgamesh story, like the clay tablets that we have,
Yeah.
don't go back before Adam and Eve. I'm saying
Yeah.
the setting of the events would be before Adam and Eve.
Okay.
So
But it's just a story, so the
yeah,
setting doesn't really matter.
it's just a story. So in both stories, all mankind are wiped out except for whoever was on the boat. In both stories, the flood is sent by the upset gods.
Mm-hmm.
In both stories, the person on the boat survives because they're righteous, not just because they were randomly chosen. Let's see.
You missed the name of them,
Oh, is that important?
in my opinion,
Oh, sure. Well, the name of
because those are different.
the name of Noah everyone knows. In the Gilgamesh epic, the person who was on the boat was Utnapishtim.
Is that a different name or the same?
Different name.
Okay, I thought these were things that were comparisons.
And also in the Gilgamesh epic, Utnapishtim never dies.
Oh,
He lives forever.
okay.
So there's that.
So some of these are different.
There's some differences. Yeah.
Okay. I thought maybe Utnapishtim was Noah in whatever Gilgamesh language was written. Just go.
No.
Okay.
One of the other differences is the way the flood was announced in the Bible. God just says to Noah directly, but in the Gilgamesh epic, there's a dream that's given. Let's see. In both narratives, they're told to build a boat. In both narratives, the main hero complains.
Okay.
The height of each boat is different, though. One is 6 stories and one is 3 stories. Both boats have many compartments. Both boats have only one door. Both boats have at least one window. Both boats are covered in pitch. The boats are both square or rectangular in nature. They're not round boats, which is really interesting. In both narratives, the righteous person chosen, his family is saved.
Well, we don't make round boats even now, right?
The Sumerians did.
Oh, they did?
Mhm.
Oh, so this would have been odd for them to not choose a round one?
Yeah,
Oh,
for sure. Yeah, the ancient Sumerians would not have built a boat like
well,
this
why did they in the book then?
because it's
In the
not
story?
about Sumerians; it's about Babylonians.
Oh, this is confusing. Go ahead.
I know it's okay. Let's see. In both stories, they're told to collect all the species of animals.
Oh, really?
Hmm. In both stories, the flood is explained through heavy rain, except the Bible explains there's heavy rain and the springs of the earth break open. The duration of the flood, way different. In Gilgamesh, it's 6 days and nights. In Genesis, some people say it's 40 days a night. We read it. The earth is underwater for a little over a year.
Mm.
I think 371 days. In both stories, they release a bird to test whether or not they find dry ground anywhere. The birds are different though. In Genesis, there's a raven and 3 doves. In Gilgamesh, there's a dove, a swallow, and a raven.
That's not much different.
Not much.
Hmm.
The landing spot is different. In the Bible, it's Mount Ararat. In Gilgamesh, it's Mount Nasir.
Is that a real mountain?
Actually, I assume so, but I don't know where it's at.
Okay.
Both Noah and Utnapishtim offer a sacrifice after the flood.
Mm-hmm.
And then both of them receive a blessing from God after the flood. So there's quite a few parallels.
So what you're saying is that it would be hard to argue that the whole Noah story was not completely lifted from Gilgamesh.
Yeah, I'm not saying that they stole it from Gilgamesh.
No, I am. I'm saying that's what you're saying.
Oh, I'm not saying that. Though.
I'm saying it then.
Oh, I'm not saying it.
Why not?
Well, because
that's what you just showed me.
well, I don't think they stole anything from Gilgamesh. I just think that they.
Yes, it's a different story. They didn't steal it, but there was heavy influences,
Oh, for sure.
and that makes it two things. One, it shows that they're trying to just show that their god is greater than the gods of Gilgamesh,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And two, something else. I forget.
Very eloquent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
it.
I mean, they're obviously they share some sort of cultural memory.
Oh.
They're just telling the story differently, I would imagine.
Mm.
Right? Just like 100 years from now, if I tell you what it was like, if I live that long to recount the Twin Towers falling,
Mm.
fact of the matter is, I'm going to tell that story differently than somebody
Yeah,
else.
but you're not going to tell it that different.
No, but give it 1,000 years different,
Mm.
and then those stories will start to diverge.
Mm.
Would
be neat to find out.
Yeah. Well, we won't.
I know.
We won't be here.
I know. I just say it would be neat.
One of the questions we focused on earlier
Yes.
in Genesis is what in the world did Ham do to Noah?
Yeah, but we already know what it is.
I think we do.
I mean, it's weird, but boy, it's the only thing that makes any sense to me now that it's explained.
Right.
That Ham had the relations with his mommy.
Right. I agree. Yeah. And the shorthand version of that is if you go to Leviticus 18, you hear quite a few passages talking about uncovering people's nakedness. And specifically, we're concerned about the nakedness of Noah. But to be quite honest, the nakedness of somebody's wife is the equivalent of their own nakedness. For example, in Leviticus 18:8 says, "You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's wife. It is the nakedness of your father."
Mm-hmm.
So if I say that I uncovered your father's nakedness, you could easily assume that I'm uncovering the nakedness of the father's wife.
Why do you think it is that people who read this don't get that?
I don't think people's reading it. I don't think most people know what's written in Leviticus 18. And I definitely don't think that people even ancient Jews, I don't think were even aware of this. Because and I'm not the first one to notice this. If you look at the individual sources for that story, there's two different storytellers, and one of the storytellers that comes later is where you get the addition where the brothers walk backwards with the blanket
Okay.
and laid over top of Noah. Well, that addition only makes sense if a later scribe was reading it and didn't know about Leviticus. And in fact, if you read Richard Noel Friedman, who wrote about the documentary hypothesis and the sources, in fact, I got his Bible right here. The Bible with sources revealed. He'll dissect this narrative as well. He thinks that the covering with the blanket is by a different author.
Oh boy, I'll tell you that opens it wide open.
Right.
Yeah, opens it wide open. You know, I think when we originally talked about this, we did not mention that it was from a different author.
Yeah, actually, so I think it could have been Klaus Westerman that mentioned it, because I'm looking at Elliot Friedman's notes right here, and he's attributing verse 18 to 27. All of those verses are attributed to the Yahwist, and that includes the uncovering the nakedness. It says, and Noah's sons who went out from the ark were Shem and Ham and Japheth. And Ham was the father of Canaan, and these three were the sons of Noah, so on and so forth. And then Noah gets drunk, and then Ham, saw his father's nakedness, so on and so forth. But I've read other commentators that actually split that and say, no, the part about the blanket was from a different author. The part about the uncovering the nakedness was.
You know what? I think I have a book to show you. Give me 1 second, all right?
Sure. I'll sure, okay. Well, I've never seen Dan bring resources to a podcast. I'm actually as surprised as anyone that he has a book for show and tell. I've never seen this, and I'm quite curious to know what book he has for show and tell. That being said, I can't really remember which book I was reading that was splitting the sources on the Noah narrative. It must have been Klaus Westerman's Genesis commentary, or maybe even Kenneth Matthews. But Kenneth Matthews is a conservative biblical scholar. I don't think he splits it out. But if there is one author for the whole narrative, then it does make it difficult to assume it's about the mother.
So it was called The Complete Guide to Fundraising Man.
What in the world does that have to do with Noah?
Oh, I'll tell you later. All right, let's.
So this had nothing to do with the topic?
I just wanted to get a drink. All right.
Oh, can you close the door? Oh, you got yourself a drink.
What?
Get yourself a drink.
I did.
You could have just said you're going to get a drink.
It seemed unprofessional, didn't it?
Well, everyone knows you did it now because you just said it.
Yeah, but that's because you.
So now it's unprofessional. Anyways,
that's because you made me say it. I was just
basically you're just a liar, liar, pants and fire now, and you're going to hell for lying.
I don't think you go to hell.
Well, it depends. If you read Revelation 21:8.
Revelation means nothing, as we know.
Well, I would.
You know, when just a brief aside, when we talked about Revelation, you really convinced me with the whole naming convention of the numbers and how it was purposely made differently in different languages. You know what I mean?
I have no clue what you're talking about.
Really?
Yep.
You know, it was supposed to reference.
You mean the Mark of the Beast?
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
that's what I said.
Yeah, that's a brief aside, but yeah, the manuscripts in Greek, the Mark of the Beast is 666, and if you take the Greek spelling of Nero's name, which is
listen to this.
Yeah, the Greek spelling of Nero's name is Neron Kaiser. If you do the Hebrew gematria on that, it comes out to 666. And if you look at the Latin manuscripts, it says 616 instead of 666. If you do the gematria on the Latinized spelling, which is the way we pronounce it, Nero Caesar, if you do gematria on that, it turned out to be 616.
Stuff like that. I mean, that single-handedly makes me believe that it's not a prophetic book, you know?
Yeah, plus it talks about how the beast is revived from a mortal wound, which was a really popular myth about Nero in the first century. In fact, Nero had 6 individual imposters that the government had to execute for causing riots, people believing that Nero resurrected from the dead. And one of them was so successful, they convinced the Parthians into going to war against the Romans. And over 20,000 Parthians went to war with the supposed resurrected Nero at their leadership, supposing that they were going to march into Rome and reestablish Nero as Caesar. And then that did not end well for them. But that's how widespread the Nero Reviditus myth was.
Reviditus?
Reviditus? Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It's Latin.
Oh, okay.
It's the Nero's revived myth. But anyways, the long and short of it is, if you can positively identify the beast as Nero, which I think you can, then literally everything in that book of Revelation is about the first century.
Yes, which is why it's always interesting to listen to, the radio programs that are like, all right, here's a guy up to talk about Revelation and what it means for the future and the tribulation and all that. And I'm like, oh boy. But that's before I talked to you, I was like, oh yeah, because I read the Left Behind series just like everybody else did, It
was a product of our time period,
I'm like, wow, I don't want to be left behind. But now I'm like, I don't think that's even a thing.
No.
Yeah?
No, it's not a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, Revelation is just a collection of failed apocalyptic prophecies.
What do you think they would say, the people who really are into that stuff?
I would just read a good scholarly commentary. Get the Anchor Yale Bible commentary on Revelation. It's one of the best commentaries on Revelation that you're ever going to get. Don't get the one that was written in like the 70s. They've updated it. There's a new one that came out just a couple years ago, and it's phenomenal. That being said, like if you just ask any New Testament scholar who studies Revelation, or like John J. Collins, or James Vanderkam, these people that study apocalyptic texts, they'll just tell you, look, all of these events that they're referring to in the book are easily identified as things happening in the first century, but you have to know the history to know that.
And they would have known that, but we, of course, don't.
Yeah, Christians don't know that because they don't study that. But that's what New Testament scholars do. They study, like if you're a New Testament scholar, you study ancient Rome.
Mm-hmm.
You study the Greco-Roman leadership and power structures and all the geopolitical events that are going on. Just like if you study the Old Testament like me, you read all the ancient Near Eastern literature and you see what's happening in the ancient Near East. So yeah, New Testament scholars aren't divided typically on Revelation.
I look forward to doing Revelation with you. Never.
It's the last book.
We'll be long dead by then, but
it's possible.
But it would still be fun, to be able to finally argue with people about it.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's continue.
I had an out of order question here.
Nice.
That I think we already touched on. Why do angels have bodies at all? But to that question, I have a secondary question.
All right.
Are the angels circumcised?
I mean, they shouldn't be, right?
Well,
because that was something to show that you were
part of God's assembly.
An Israelite.
Yeah, but even the foreigners had to do it.
Yeah, when they assimilated into the culture, right?
Right, of course. Mm-hmm.
So angels would never assimilate into a culture.
Right, but is there a good reason for circumcision?
Of course not, but that's neither here nor there.
Well, some people theorize that the circumcision was better for penile health,
Yes, but it isn't.
right? But if you believe it is,
Yeah.
then I assume you would,
Yeah, but I assume God would know that
right?
if he's the one telling people.
Well, he created the penis.
Right. So
Yeah.
I'm saying he can't, they can't use that as an excuse because obviously God must have had a different reason.
Yeah. What was the reason for circumcision?
Well, there wasn't one, right? I'm telling you.
Well, God could have picked any number of different symbols. Why did he pick, taking a flint knife to the?
Well, you said the circumcision had occurred before.
Yeah, in Egypt.
Right. So it's not even like this was created by God or anything. So, I mean, it's very possible none of this was. I mean, is this only. I don't know. I just think it could have been a remnant from a different culture. And so God never really said it.
Is circumcision like considered genital mutilation?
No.
They did. There were some cultures that practiced genital mutilation.
Mm-hmm. I mean, they still do nowadays
Yeah,
for the women.
right. So circumcision is basically just neutral.
Yeah, I would say.
There's no benefit to it.
But there's nothing really wrong with it either.
So do you think God created the penis to have foreskin so that they could circumcise themselves?
That sounds like a crazy reason.
So it's just extra. Does it have a purpose?
I don't know. I mean, does the whatever have a purpose? What's that?
Appendix?
Yeah, does the appendix have a purpose?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, it aids in digestion.
Yeah, does it?
It does.
Does it?
Yeah.
Because a lot of people think it doesn't do anything.
Yeah, in the 60s they thought that. They don't think that anymore.
Well, I only read things from the 60s.
Apparently, people know it does things.
All right, fine. How about your tonsils?
Yeah, they do the same thing.
All right. Well,
Can you live without them? Yes.
what about your vestigial tail?
I don't think you need that.
Ah,
Well, you have to believe in evolution to believe in vestigial tails, and you don't believe in evolution.
of course not. I'm not an idiot. Go, say something. I don't know why they have bodies, okay? Except that people need to be able to see them.
Sure. Can you see something that doesn't have a body?
Well, no. I mean, it depends on how you're saying see it. If it's projected right into your mind, sure.
Right. Yeah. So, like, the angels can't be immaterial.
Right.
They just have to be a different kind of material.
Yeah.
If they're immaterial, then they're invisible.
If they're immaterial, then
They don't exist.
What are the people in Sodom and Gomorrah going to do with them, you know?
Right.
We're like, well, this was a waste.
Right. Yeah. Which actually we're about to get to next.
Nice.
You brought up a question earlier about Sodom and Gomorrah. Let's do one more question before we hit Sodom.
All right.
Remember when the three visitors visited Abraham and Sarai?
I remember this. Yeah.
Yeah. Who were those visitors?
Well, I know there were arguments about who they were.
We went back and forth probably maybe 3 different times trying to
Yeah.
figure out who they were. I think
Right.
we did come up with a good conclusion.
Yeah, I think it was God and 2 angels.
Yeah,
Is that
Yahweh
what it
and
was?
2 angels.
Wow.
Mhm.
I actually remembered that.
You did good.
That is pretty darn
Because
good.
at the end of the conversation in chapter 18, the 2 angels carry on and Yahweh returns back. And then you only hear about the 2 angels later.
Yeah.
And then the next time Yahweh's mentioned, he's raining brimstone and fire from heaven.
Mm-hmm.
So it appears that it's Yahweh accompanied by 2 different angels.
Yeah. I know for some reason that's a hot button issue. I don't know why it is.
I don't know
I
either.
talked to one lady who was really, yeah.
I don't see why that's such a contentious issue. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Are we saying God's not able to manifest on the earth? That's crazy. He
Yeah.
walked in the garden.
Well, I don't know about that one, but
Well, yes, what it says.
well, I know, but that was obviously one of those whatever the word is.
Hebrew verb, halak.
No, I mean, it was, walking in the garden, like you could feel him or something. I mean, he wasn't really walking in the garden.
They could have used a different word other than walk,
Yeah, but they knew people were smart enough.
but they heard him.
Well, yes.
So he obviously, if you could hear him, he manifested.
Why would he be walking in the garden?
Because he manifested.
Why?
Because he manifests just like humans do.
So was that Jesus then?
No.
God manifested a human form before Jesus came on the earth,
Yeah.
but they were different beings.
Yeah.
That's crazy, right?
Well, the angels can manifest in human form. Why can't Yahweh?
I don't know if they can. Maybe that's their actual form.
Well, they're blinking women.
Right. But I'm just saying, maybe angels do not manifest human forms.
So they just already have human forms.
Right.
Well, then so would God.
I don't know if that follows, but why would God need to have a human form? Because angels do.
The angels are the children of God.
Well, we're the children of God, right?
Well, we're made in the image of God.
Oh, is that different?
Yeah.
I don't know. Let's keep going.
I know, it's wild.
I bet you have like 50 questions.
No, I ran out of steam
Oh,
at some point, and then I ran out of time as well.
how
So
many do you have?
I don't know. About to find out.
Let's do it.
So, how is it possible that Abraham couldn't find 10 righteous people in Sodom to prevent God from annihilating the entire city?
You know what? It's very possible. I mean, everybody seemed really into having their way with the angels. You know what I mean? Didn't seem like there was anybody there saying, hey, let's not do this. So maybe everybody really was bad, you know?
Do you think all the women were bad too? Do
Well, women don't count, obviously.
you think the babies were evil?
Babies don't count either. We're talking about the young man, okay?
So all the men were unrighteous.
Yeah, I'm just kidding, but I'm pretty sure that's how they'd look at it for real, right?
That is actually how they would look at it.
Yeah.
Yeah, the women and the children are basically property of the men.
And I mean, that's probably how, I mean, yeah, I mean, I don't know if that's how God would look at it, but it's certainly how he seems to have been looking at it. You know what I mean?
And how many, right? They already had a number of people that could have been saved. They had Lot's wife, virgin daughter, number 1, virgin daughter, number 2, married daughter, number 1, married daughter, number 2, or possibly only 2 daughters, depending on how you read it.
Are you suggesting that those people were not evil?
Well, I'm saying that, the daughters were saved anyways.
Yeah.
So it didn't matter if they were described as righteous or not. They were saved regardless. And
Right.
remember, God said that, Abraham, surely you wouldn't sweep away the righteous alongside the unrighteous.
Yeah.
And it seems to be that God is confirming that no, I won't be sweeping away
Right.
The unrighteous and the righteous all in one. But if we just look at who we've got Lot's wife, possibly 4 daughters,
Yeah.
2 sons-in-laws, which could have been saved. They had the opportunity to be saved.
Right.
I don't think it would be too much of a stretch to say, hey, maybe could you have found, like, I don't know, 4 more people?
But I mean, the only reason they were saved is because they were, related to Abraham. I mean, we're not actually saying that they were actually good people.
That's what the book actually says, that Lot was basically spared because of his affiliation with Abraham, which
is not fair.
Which brings up an interesting point, that the people being preserved weren't necessarily being preserved because they were righteous, except that in the New Testament, Lot is called a preacher of righteousness.
Yeah, I just ignore that. Who wrote that?
The 2 Peter, I believe. Either Jude or 2 Peter.
Who wrote that?
Either Jude or Peter.
Oh, I feel like Paul wrote everything other than the Gospels.
He wrote a lot.
So I don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
So, anyways, that was something we were kind of kicking around. It seems odd that he couldn't find 10. I understand why the rhetoric is there. It's to ease the mind of the reader to say, no, God didn't just wipe out all these innocent people. They were all wicked. But it just seems implausible that every human being in the city was wicked.
Well, how many people were in the city? Do we even know?
And we have no idea.
Maybe it was 100 people.
Could have been. What if there's only 50?
Then it's very possible they're all evil.
Right. Um, like, do you think there was a biblical Sodom? And if so, where was it?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Because I think when we were discussing this, we actually saw an area where like it was in the right area and things were like all turned to salt.
Well, so we discussed briefly the site referred to as Tel El Hammam, where there was an air blast that hit the region, and it was so hot and so powerful that it basically like melted the sulfur, and it even cracked like quartz crystals,
Mm-hmm.
and it completely annihilated the whole region. And it like the remnants from that explosion like was thrown like miles away.
Right. Bam.
So the only issue that we have with identifying Tel El Hammam with Sodom is that it was in the northeast of the Dead Sea region rather than the southeast, and the time period is a little bit off. It happened in the 1600s, whereas biblical Sodom was more like 1900.
These are very easily rectified, though.
I think dates are pretty elastic, to be honest.
And
I personally think that the destruction of Tel El Hammam is the source of this narrative.
you think that happened and they wrote a narrative, like a story
That's
to
why I
tell
think.
what happened.
Yeah, I think the region got completely wiped out, and they had to figure out why. Just like when a hurricane hit Katrina, people were like, "Oh, it's because of X, Y, and Z." You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's quite a story to make up, huh?
A hell of a story.
Right. Which is why I doubt that's really what happened, right?
Well, I mean, I don't know what your opinion is. I don't think that it's a real story.
I think it is. I think it's based on that what we were just talking about, tell and or whatever.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's like salt pillars there.
So there's salt pillars all throughout the Dead Sea.
Sure, but this is different because it was a big explosion.
Right, but I'm saying there's salt and sulfur all throughout the Dead
Yeah,
Sea
but
region.
this is like something only God could do, some real amazing thing, big explosion.
An air blast from a meteor?
Yeah.
Oh, meteors hit the planet all the time.
Yeah, but is there an air blast from them all the time?
Yeah.
Sure, does it turn things to salt all the time?
Well, no, the salt was already there.
Well, you know what I mean. Whatever happened, okay?
Well, the Dead Sea is a collection of salt.
Okay, well, how many times does the Dead Sea get hit by meteors?
Only once, as far as I can tell.
Bam.
Right.
Proving my point.
That's what I'm saying. Is an air blast hit the region.
Yeah.
It destroyed a whole bunch of things, and then people made up a mythology as to why it happened.
Or it really happened.
Right. That's a possibility.
Right,
I just
yeah.
don't believe it.
Well, I think I might.
No, it's okay if you do.
Oh, it's okay.
Yeah. I'm not saying you have to believe what I believe.
Yeah.
I'm just saying I don't buy it.
That's all right. But I mean, the fact that, it only happened once, never again, I mean, I understand what you're saying is, well, that's why people had to make up myths around it because it was so fantastical. But
well, it did happen.
What?
It did happen multiple times.
No, just the one.
No, meteors hit the planet all the time.
Yeah, but did it have like a big old salt burst?
There was no salt burst from this. I don't know where you keep getting that from.
Well, the Dead Sea is pretty much made up of salt.
Yeah, where do you think the salt came from?
The Dead Sea
Yes.
interacting with the meteor.
No.
Well, or something.
The runoff from the mountain water and the Jordan River empty out into the Dead Sea, and because the Dead Sea doesn't actually go to the ocean where most of the water runs to in the rivers, all of the salt and minerals that are carried down from the mountains deadhead into the Dead Sea. That's why you have such a huge collection of salt there, because there's nowhere for the minerals to escape to. Whereas any other time, that's why the oceans are so salty, because the fresh water, the rivers and whatnot, they collect mineral and salt as it makes its way to the ocean. So that's why the Dead Sea is so salty, because it doesn't empty out into the ocean. It just deadheads.
You think there's any fish in there?
I don't know if any fish can survive there.
Yeah.
But I do know that's why it's so salty, but that's also why there's a bunch of sulfur there, because sulfur is a byproduct of bacteria feeding on salt. Every time you find a sulfur deposit, you typically find it on top of a salt deposit. because that's just what happens. Just like when yeast feed on sugar, it produces alcohol. Well, when bacteria feed on the salt, it produces sulfur. And so, where you have large salt deposits, you're incredibly likely to also have large sulfur deposits.
Huh. Okay.
Yeah. So, anyways, who's the angel of the Lord?
The angel of the Lord? I don't know, Michael?
The text never says. I don't have an answer.
Well, all right. I mean, Michael, right? Isn't he the big top dog?
Could be Michael, could be Gabriel, but I think Michael's a good choice. So it could be anybody that carries the divine name of Yahweh.
Well, this is true.
Like in Exodus, when God sends the angel in front of him, he says that my name will be in him.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm.
So any angelic divine emissary of God could theoretically be the angel of Yahweh.
Right, I get that.
Do angels eat?
Yes, they do.
Yeah, we saw it.
We did, yeah.
In Genesis, and I think we had a minor disagreement on whether or not Psalm 79 was about angels eating.
Okay.
Psalm 79, verse. Grab the verse.
How do you remember this?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I've got an interesting brain.
I believe that.
Let's see. I must have mistyped the verse number. Psalm 79 talks about the food of the angels. Is it 79 or 97? See, now I think I wrote down the wrong passage. But I can find the right passage. Give me just a second.
Yeah, I'll tell a funny joke.
Yeah, tell a funny joke.
So there was a guy and he was walking on the beach.
Psalm 78. I apologize.
Good. I didn't want
to. There's a typo. Psalm 78:25 is what I was looking for.
Let's do it.
This is a retelling of the Exodus. It says, referring to God, he rained down on them manna to eat and gave them the grain of heaven. Mortals ate the bread of the angels, and he sent them food in abundance.
Mm-hmm.
So, is that a metaphor, or is he saying that in heaven the angels eat?
I mean, it certainly could be both, obviously.
Right.
I guess, I don't know what we disagreed about. I would say both are possible.
I think they are, actually. Yeah.
I mean, manna seemed really weird, you know what I mean? Because it wasn't just regular food. It was like food that gave you all the sustenance, right?
It was like a heavenly type of food that you didn't have here on Earth.
It was like Turkish delight.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
I assume so, except not as moist. It would collect.
My Turkish delight was always hard.
I love Turkish delight, actually.
Okay.
Even like the original rose flavored Turkish delight. Not everyone likes it. I love it.
It's flavored like a flower.
Yeah. In fact, I might get some later this week. Anyways, according to Genesis, why did the Israelites need or require to be enslaved in Egypt?
According to Genesis, because the inequities of the whatever's hadn't been as inequitified.
The iniquities of the Amorites had not yet been completed.
That is literally what I said.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's what I said.
Yeah.
Inequities.
Iniquities?
That's what I said.
Sure. So that is interesting.
Yeah, because it means it's not really an answer.
Not a great answer, but that's the only thing we got.
Yeah.
There's really no other explanation in the Bible other than one passage from Ezekiel where Ezekiel basically claims that while they were in Egypt, they were disobedient. But that's a rationalization that Ezekiel puts on the text later. That's not. That's not what the text says.
Don't see any disobedience other than, nothing worth being enslaved for 430 years or something.
Mm-hmm. Is God all knowing
Yes.
according to Genesis?
Depends on what part of Genesis, I guess.
Right.
At the beginning, obviously, he's not because, he couldn't hear Hagar's Ishmael crying, right?
Well,
But then he put on his listening ears.
Yeah, and then God heard, yeah.
Right.
And he also was surprised when Adam and Eve ate the fruit, said, "What is this thing that you have done?" And then in Genesis 22:12, he says when Abraham nearly sacrifices his son, he says, "Now I know." What
Yeah, right. Yeah.
do you mean now you know?
Right.
Genesis doesn't really paint in like an all-knowing God.
I just think that's how the writers knew of God at the time,
Well, they're writing the words of God.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean,
Did they record the words accurately? Yeah, it's possible they didn't.
I doubt God said anything, right?
Yeah. Is God omnipresent?
Yes,
Sure.
of course.
In Genesis, when they built the tower, God said, let us go down and see."
Yes, but again, the people writing this didn't really understand how God worked because they were comparing him to all the false gods.
Well, I'm saying in Genesis. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not saying according to whoever wrote Genesis,
Yeah,
are they depicting God as being omnipresent?
of course not.
Yeah, they're not
No.
so much. Now, he does become kind of quasi omnipresent later in the text, but not entirely. Like, even in Deuteronomy 23, there's instructions to bury their feces outside of the camp, because Yahweh is going to be walking among you, and he doesn't want to come in contact with any indecent thing. So if Yahweh has like an aversion to being in contact with feces, then I
Who doesn't?
would imagine being omnipresent would be a problem.
I finally got what you meant. Okay.
See the problem with that?
Yeah. You always stepping in it.
Yeah, I feel like the omnipresent thing with Yahweh is like an invention of much later thinking. That's like Greek thinking.
I mean, but it's not really an invention. That's really how God is. But I mean, maybe they just.
Well, is he though? Like, does God need to be omnipresent? Isn't hell separation from God?
Well, I don't believe in hell.
Right, but according to the doctrine of hell, everyone tells me that hell is just separation from
Yeah,
God.
but what's the doctrine? It's not supported by the Bible, right?
Kind of, yeah.
Kind of is or kind of isn't?
There is, yeah.
A little bit.
Does God need to be omnipresent though?
Well, yeah.
Why?
Because then, if not, he might miss something, huh?
So it happens all the time in the Bible.
No, no, it doesn't. It's just humans putting their own limited thoughts of God into it.
Okay,
I'm good with words.
fair enough.
Yeah.
Would God be God if he wasn't omnipresent?
I
actually don't have a problem with this. I think God can still be God even if he's not omnipresent.
I mean,
because you can still be all-knowing without being omnipresent.
Right, yeah.
Right.
I mean, he's got to be all-knowing.
I would think so. I think it's not incongruent with the ancient idea that a God could not be. There are definitely things that God could not know and still be God, according to the ancient mind.
A lot of things.
Yeah, it's just that ever since the period of the Persians and the Greeks, they've kind of imagined God as knowing all things.
Mm-hmm.
But is that necessary? Could he still be God without being all-knowing and without being omnipresent? I think he could.
I mean, he's got to be all-powerful.
But he's got to be all-powerful. I agree with you there. For God to be God, it does kind of imply that he's all-powerful. But does it require for him to know all things or to be in all places at once?
Probably not being in all places at once. That's probably not a deal breaker.
Because that's one of the biggest issues with sin. Like, well, we're separated from God because of this sin, and God cannot be in the company of sin. so on and so forth, which is a lie because Satan is in God's company in the book of Job. But if we take that to be true, then obviously God's not omnipresent, because then he would always be among us sinners and partaking in our sin.
Right. Is God in hell?
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. So
Yeah.
the doctrine of being omnipresent doesn't seem to actually match with what the Bible says.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's like,
Especially because they always got to build these altars for him to come chilling, right?
yeah. And remember, God is said to come dwell in his temple. He says, all the nations will know that I am God. When all of Israel is restored, and I set my temple among my people again, and I will be their God. They'll be my people. How is it that God is inhabiting the temple when he's omnipresent? And that would be a weird thing to say if you're omnipresent,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then when he's not in his temple, it says that his holy habitation is in the heavens, just above the firmament. Well, how does God have a habitation at the top of the firmament if he's omnipresent? Right? His habitation would be everything.
Yeah. But I mean, I have to assume that was just the early writers comparing it to what, like Mount Olympus and all that, you know? I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, but I will say like like the holiest of holies and stuff like that, never really picked up on why that was a thing, since God is supposedly everywhere.
Well, that's the thing. According to the Torah, God is not everywhere. In fact, he specifically has locations. For example, on Mount Sinai or in the tabernacle in the Holy of Holies. Whereas, latter portions of the Bible might depict God as being more omni in nature.
Mm-hmm.
The Torah doesn't really do that, I don't think.
I would say I think they just didn't understand God.
It's possible that they didn't.
However, if God was instructing him to make these places where he could dwell, then
Right. And he did.
I don't really know. I don't know what his reasoning is.
Right.
Unless it's because he knew that the humans would take it as a more, important location.
But it's odd to me that God would want a specific location
Yeah.
when you could literally sacrifice to him anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it even says earlier, when the Noah makes a sacrifice, that the aroma went up and it was a pleasing aroma to the Lord. Well, that makes sense if you believe that he's physically located in the heavens, where the smoke rises up to.
Yeah.
If you are omnipresent, you could make a sacrifice anywhere in the world and God would smell the pleasing aroma. And there'd be no need to assemble in one location.
Oh, that means we don't need churches.
Right. Well, we don't need those anyways.
That's
Even
true.
in Christian doctrine, they're not really necessary.
Yeah. So I don't know what the answer is.
Anyways, so let's move on to
Not really answering a lot of questions, just getting a lot more questions.
We're doing a little bit of both, I
You
think.
think so?
Yeah. Now talking again about the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Why was Zoar spared?
That was because that's where Lot wanted to head to, right?
Yeah.
And you can't kill Lot because he's related to Abraham.
Right. It says, look, the city is near enough to flee to. Look, the city is near enough to flee to, and it is a little one. Let me escape there. Is it not a little one? And my life will be saved. And he said to him, very well, I grant you this favor too, and I will not overthrow the city of which you have spoken. Hurry and escape there, for I can do nothing until you have arrived there.
Yeah.
Therefore, the city was called Zoar, and the sun had risen.
So what's Zoar mean?
I don't know.
Okay.
Sorry.
It
I didn't
just
look it up.
Seemed like they were trying to figure out why it was called Zoar,
I mean, we can look it up real quick.
Let's do it.
Wouldn't take more than a second.
All right.
But yeah.
Because they said, therefore, that's why the city is called Zoar.
Yeah, it must mean something.
Place of refuge sanctuary. There you go.
Yeah,
That makes perfect sense.
That does make perfect sense. So the long and short of it is,
I mean, if we're taking this at face value to be true, then obviously this whole thing is ridiculous because, it means that God really didn't need to kill all the wicked people.
Right, because if he was going to initially kill everybody in Zoar,
Yeah, which is it's what it says,
then it
right?
means they must have all been wicked, because he's
Right.
not going to wipe away the righteous alongside the wicked.
Right.
But then he spares Zoar,
Mm-hmm.
which means either he was never going to wipe it out to begin with,
Mm-hmm.
or he changed his mind and he relented in wiping out these wicked people. And then you would ask, well, if he chose not to wipe out these people for the sake of Lot, then was it necessary to wipe out Sodom?
Right. Can God change his mind?
And why was it necessary for him to spare the city? Could not he have unalived everybody in the city while Lot and his daughters were on their way there?
Yeah, or put them all in a little bubble.
Because what kind of protection were they really going to get in Zoar? Because the first thing they do when they get there is they flee to the damn mountains.
Yeah,
So it's not like they were getting anything from the city.
right. Yeah, the whole people got spared.
It's weird.
It's not weird. It's ridiculous.
A little bit ridiculous.
I mean, stuff like that does kind of make me go, well, maybe Sodom and Gomorrah didn't really happen that way, you know?
There was embellishments.
Must
Yeah.
have been. Still, I mean, that city looked a lot like, what Gomorrah would have looked like. All that salt pillars and stuff,
Well, every city surrounding the Dead Sea looked like that.
Yeah, but this one looked different because the meteor hit it. New topic. All right.
How old was Sarah when she was kidnapped in Egypt and then subsequently by the king of Gerar, Abimelech?
20 or something. 100.
She was a booming granny.
There you go.
She was in her 70s, most likely,
Okay.
according to the math that we did earlier.
But she was quite attractive. So
She was a looker, but you had a really good solution for this.
Oh, well,
Do you remember what it was?
yeah, but why don't you tell people?
So the solution that you came up with was that, remember when God promised that he would enable her to have children?
Mm-hmm.
Well, this must have accompanied some sort of like physical rejuvenation.
Yeah.
Or it's just a flat out miracle, but she was able to nurse a child, right?
Yes, exactly.
So I think we must assume that there was some sort of body rejuvenation. And if that's true,
Mm-hmm.
it seems likely that she had the appearance of a much younger woman because the Lord rejuvenated her body so she can have children.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I actually like this solution. I think it's a good solution.
Oh, maybe I'll write a paper on it.
Because otherwise, she's kind of a booming granny.
Yep.
I mean, theoretically, given how long she lived, I think, was she 127 or something?
That's exactly it.
It's still, 70 something is, still, it's not old, but it's well past middle age.
Yeah, that'd be
And-
like 50s or something.
Yeah, and kings typically don't get kidnapped, menopausal, post middle age women. They kidnap
Yeah.
the young, pretty virgins,
Right.
So I think your solution stands. I think that's probably the best solution there is.
Nice. Look at that.
Yeah. What are the odds that King Abimelech kidnapped Abraham's wife and then quite nearly almost kidnapped Rebecca as well?
Well, that might have just been like, was it him or was it like his son who took his name?
Oh, it doesn't say that. It says King Abimelech.
Yeah, but I mean, is there proof that this Abimelech existed in real life?
No.
Oh, there isn't?
No, it's quite anachronistic. In fact, the city of Gerar and the Philistines didn't exist in this time period.
So why was the story made up?
Well, because at the time the story was made up, those people did exist. That's why it's an anachronism.
Yeah. That made sense to you. What?
I mean, somebody was possibly living there, but they weren't Philistines.
Okay.
And the city was not called Gerar.
Okay.
You know what I mean? We don't know who it was or what the name of the city was, but
okay.
at the time of writing, it was called Gerar.
Okay.
Right.
So they were just assuming that since it's named that now, it was named that back in the day.
Yeah, or they just didn't know what the name of it was and they just called it by
Right.
what they knew it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I think the only reason that there would have been Abimelech twice is, I mean, we did mention the fact that maybe some of these stories were amalgamations.
Mhm.
not even on purpose.
Yeah, like doublets.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the kidnapping of the young pretty or the pretty wife, and but she's also my
Yeah,
sister.
it's like a trope.
Yeah, I find it hard to believe that it happened twice. I really lean towards it probably happened once, but it was such a well-known story
Mm.
that different people groups kind of told it differently.
Or co-opted it for
Yeah.
their own heroes.
Yeah, it's certainly possible.
Because I know what Abraham was big with, what, the South,
Yeah, I would think so.
and then whoever, Isaac. No, I don't know. I'm just saying stuff till you say it's right or wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't really know, but it does seem plausible that
I mean, because that was Isaac's wife, right? And as we know, Isaac had pretty much nothing going on in the Bible.
yeah,
So he could have easily not even been in there. Therefore, maybe he wasn't in there. Maybe his story just got, a little separated. And so they had to put them both in because they didn't really know. Made sense.
but like that's the thing. Isaac is so important to the patriarch um section of the text,
Just
but
because he's a stepping stone.
yeah, but he doesn't do anything.
No.
Like what's he other than passing on his genetics? Like what did he really do?
Right. That's it.
You know? Um but he does introduce us. The story of Isaac introduces us to Laban, who is important, right? The uncle
Yeah.
um of Joseph or Jacob,
Yeah.
right? Which is our next topic.
Okay.
The brothers,
The brothers.
the twins,
The twins.
Jacob and Esau,
Jacob and Esau.
right? Oddly enough, we didn't talk about this at the time because I didn't know about it. But how old was Jacob when he left the house and escaped to Laban's
Well,
place?
he was like in his 30s. Isn't that what we determined?
70 something.
70.
77, I believe.
That's pretty old.
That's insane. Which means when he married his first wife, technically both wives, he would have been, I think, it ended up being like 84.
Yeah. Is that how old he really was? Or
Or-
how old they're...
No, that's how he actually was. If you do the timeline in Genesis and
Yeah.
calculate the ages, I laid out a timeline in Excel using all the ages given in Genesis of the individual people. And
Yeah.
he was, for a fact, 77 when he left. And if he worked for Laban for 14 years, or I mean 7 years, before he married, then he would be 84 when he married Leah and Rachel.
Yeah.
How old were Leah and Rachel? We're not told. We could probably do some.
They were able to have children for him.
Yeah, they were young enough to have children for sure.
So they're at least under 40.
You would think. Yeah.
And yeah.
There's a very odd age gap.
Right. So I think that happens in real life too.
Guys in their 70s fathering the women in their 20s, 30s.
Yeah.
It does happen occasionally. I knew a woman who was into older men. She was 40 years younger than her first husband and her second husband.
Did she outlive them or?
Obviously.
Oh, obviously.
Both of them.
Yeah. Maybe she was just a gold digger.
She wasn't actually. I knew her personally. She was a friend of mine, and I knew her. She had 2 daughters as well. And I knew both the daughters. I went to school with one of them, and she was a very nice lady. That was just like apparently that's just what she was into.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why.
Is she dead?
Oh, she's still alive.
Oh, really?
Both of the men are gone.
Right, yeah. How old is she?
Well, see now she's got to be in her 60s.
Okay. They would have been in their hundreds.
Well, if they were still alive.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. But when I knew her, I was about 20.
Okay.
And she would have been, I don't know, maybe 41, 42.
Dating 80.
So now she's 60 something.
Now she's got to find 100-year-olds.
I don't know if she's.
That's tough.
I don't
man.
know. I don't know what's going to happen there.
That's tough. There aren't that many of them.
I mean, it's hard to find.
It is, yeah.
You got to go to the blue zones.
I don't know what that means. Blue zones.
the areas of the world where people live the longest,
Oh,
like
that
the
makes- is that an
Mediterranean.
expression?
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh, Google Blue Zones later.
okay.
So anyways, long and short of it is interesting age gap.
Yeah.
What are the odds that Jacob was so stupid he didn't know that his wife was being switched on the night that he consummated his marriage?
Now, Jacob seemed like a pretty stupid guy. So, who knows? You know? I mean, he was gullible as hell.
He was, but it seems like something you. It seems like a stretch of a mistake.
I don't know if it is or not. Back then, it seemed as though it was perfectly normal for the woman to just be there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but
Like, am I to assume he was going to sit down and have a nice talk with her beforehand?
well, he worked for Laban for 7 years.
Right.
Presumably, he knew the voice of both of those women.
Well, did they speak?
I assume so.
Did
How
they
do you
speak?
how do you work in somebody's household for 7 years and not
no,
hear them
I mean,
ever
did they
speak?
speak? Did
On the wedding night?
Yeah.
You would hope so.
Anyway,
Did you, when you were married, did you spend your wedding night in silence?
yeah.
That's crazy.
What?
I don't believe you.
Well, I wouldn't. I wouldn't lie about that. Yeah.
I mean, that's obviously one of the most important parts
Yeah. But
of the timeline. You would have a conversation about something.
yeah, maybe it's far fetched. I'll give you that.
It's a little far-fetched. I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm saying it's hard to believe.
Oh, I don't think any of this happened.
You know what's even harder to believe
What?
is Lot not knowing he's sleeping with his 2 daughters.
Yeah, that's.
That's crazy. I don't care how drunk you are.
I know, yeah.
And the odds that he knocked both of them up the first time,
Yeah.
they just happened to be perfectly fertile and in that part of the cycle.
But I mean, he did it again the next night, right?
Well, he slept with one, then he slept with the other.
Right. So I mean,
And they both got pregnant.
right. But I mean,
And what an irony, both of those children ended up being enemies of Israel, the Ammonites and the Moabites.
well, that's probably just a coincidence.
I'm sure it is.
Nothing more.
Right.
Feels like that whole story was made just to figure out why the Israelites hated these people so
Yeah.
much.
I think so.
Yeah, that's super. Which is weird. I don't know
well-
why you'd want to rake Lot's name through the coals so much, you know?
Esau too is villainized.
Yeah.
And he's the father of who? The Edomites, who were also enemies.
Yeah.
So all these people that are kind of villainized in the Old Testament happen to be the forefathers of people groups that are enemies of Israel.
Right. Which is why this is more an origin story than actual truth.
Right. I
I'd
agree.
love to know why they actually were like fighting against each other.
Right. Me too.
Maybe it was just land.
It was like if you read the King Mashia stele that was written in the 8th century, they basically tell the story like, hey, for a long time, our forefathers were oppressed by the Israelites. And they talk about a battle over land and things like that.
Mhm.
And
I mean, that's what it's going to be, right? Because they were trying to get into Canaan, right?
it's always about land.
And they all lived in there, right? Didn't like every person you're talking about lived in Canaan, right?
But, yeah, in the Canaanite region.
Yeah.
So they're always fighting over land, obviously. And
Yeah.
there's only so much good land in the area because there's desert in the Negev, there's hill country, and then there's the Dead Sea where nothing can grow.
Mhm.
And so it's like there's a limited amount of like really usable land.
It wasn't salt, like a nice spice.
Yeah, I mean salt itself was important.
Well, then I bet the Dead Sea was like printing money.
I don't know about that. I assume that the Dead Sea was a source of salt for traders, but it's odd that it's not mentioned in the Bible because you would think that such a good resource for salt would be mentioned, considering how important it was.
Well, it depends. What did the Dead Sea look like 6,000 years ago?
Salty?
Yeah, but maybe it was a lot smaller.
Oh, I don't know. Actually, that's a good question.
That stuff happens, right? Regions change shapes.
Right.
I don't know how long it takes, though.
I don't
For
know.
millions of years.
So moving to the narrative of Joseph,
Okay.
right? You already mentioned that Jacob isn't too bright.
Right.
I happen to agree with you considering the Joseph narrative.
Yeah.
What part of I mean, we've already discussed that what happened to Joseph seems to be predetermined by God.
Yeah.
Does Jacob have any blame here?
Well, obviously.
I feel like he has to.
Right. I mean, he gave him a technicolor coat to say, "You are the best. You are my favorite. You are my chosen one."
Right.
It probably plants some seeds of animosity.
Such a terrible thing to do as a father.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't bright.
No,
He was just a dumb shepherd.
that sounds mean,
You
but
know? Shepherds probably aren't that dumb in real life.
that sounds like an insult, like a slur.
It
Dumb,
kind of does.
dumb
What
shepherd?
if you're Egyptian? That is a slur.
That's true.
That's why they had to settle in Goshen,
Mm-hmm.
because the ways of the shepherd are detestable to the Egyptians. In fact, that gets repeated in Exodus when they say we need to go and sacrifice it in the desert
Yeah.
because our sacrifices are detestable.
And then when they went into the desert, they ran away, right?
Not that first time.
But the second time?
Well, yeah, eventually they ran off after they, God murdered all of the firstborn among the Egyptians, which is, another story for another time.
But it's coming up.
Actually is.
Yeah.
Yeah. The story of Joseph is an interesting one. It takes up a huge portion of Genesis.
It really is. It's like 20 chapters.
It's so long.
It's nuts. I was writing on here that it seems like Genesis can be split into 3 main stories. One is the creation, 2 is Abraham, and 3 is Joseph. Well, the how the Israelites came to be. What I mean with Abraham.
Yeah, that's actually a really good designation. A lot of scholars would say the first 11 chapters are primeval history, and then there's the patriarchal history, and then you've got the Joseph cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's pretty good. That's a good classification you got going there. And I agree with you.
Nice.
The Joseph cycle appears to be important more to the north than the south,
Right.
obviously, because they emphasize so heavily Ephraim and Manasseh, the 2 most primary tribes of the north. But hey, Judah makes some pretty interesting appearances.
Right.
We did see a little bit of punishment for Simeon and Levi of what they did to the Shechemites.
I guess so. A slap on the wrist, you mean?
Yeah. Do you think that the punishment dealt to Simeon and Levi was, too light for murdering an entire city and kidnapping all the women and children?
Do I think it was too light? Yes.
Yeah.
Do.
It seemed a little bit because remember, God says that the bloodshed of an innocent person cries out from the ground.
Yeah, but then later on we find out maybe none of that even happened, right?
Yeah, it does seem that the narrative of what happened in Shechem appears to be an invention of the southern scribes, basically trying to poo-poo on the primary city of the north.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
mean, honestly, that almost, you gotta believe that because it's just so unlikely that 2 people are gonna go through a whole city and just kill everybody.
It's also a little bit problematic too, because just a couple chapters later, there are people in Shechem.
Right, yeah. So, I mean, honestly, that's reminiscent to me of when Moses, kicks the stone. And so he's not allowed to, because, obviously that didn't happen, but they wanted to write something bad about Moses. That's
Yeah.
what I think,
Right.
It doesn't make any sense.
Were there any standout issues in the Joseph narrative that you recall?
Can you be a lot more specific than that? Standout issues?
Not issues, but were there any standout moments in the Joseph narrative that made you think?
Well, he cries a lot.
He does cry a lot.
Yeah.
He does cry a lot.
He's a crier.
I think the big standout moment for me in the Joseph cycle is how much of it seems to be predetermined by God. Like God was orchestrating
I don't know if that's a standout moment. That's the whole thing,
That kind of is,
you
yeah.
know, from, yeah. And I hate to bring that up because I don't know where you go from it. You know what I mean? There's no real answer there,
Right, right.
unfortunately.
I agree. It's a difficult topic to address because you kind of have to assume that if God is orchestrating all things, some of the things that He orchestrated seems illogical.
Like I mean, so he orchestrated this whole Joseph thing so that the Egyptians could be slaves later, or
Right?
what?
Isn't that weird?
Yeah,
Yeah.
because they wouldn't have been slaves if he hadn't done the Joseph thing to begin with. So,
Right.
and Joseph did say he was working all things for good or whatever, you know. So,
And could it not be possible for God to locate the Israelites in a different territory where they wouldn't be enslaved for hundreds of years while the sin of the Amorites are being completed? Or he just not work it out so that while they're in Egypt, they never get enslaved and they just remain in Egypt and they have control over Egypt until they leave?
yeah,
All of that could have happened.
all of that could have happened.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Seems like they're looking for a reason to explain.
So I mean, we're getting into this later, but did that really happen in history? That the Israelites were enslaved for 400 years?
I mean, some people think that the Hyksos people
Yeah.
is the historical memory of this. The kernel of truth is that, there were some Semitic speaking people from the land of Canaan that dwelt in Egypt during the time of Abraham, and they did become very populous, and so much so that they took control over Egypt at one point and controlled the entire city. In fact, they're called the not the Hyksos kings. There's another name for it. I forget what they call them, but there was a series of kings in Egypt that were not Egyptian, and so that really happened. And then the Egyptians fought back, and there was a great war,
And that really happened.
and then yeah, that really happened. And then they expelled all of the Hyksos people from the land, and then they chased them into Canaan, unaliving them. So that seems to be like the catalyst for the narrative of the Exodus.
And the plagues?
Plagues are unrelated to what happened with the Hyksos, but we do know around the time of Moses, according to the Bible, not around the time of the Hyksos expulsion, there were plagues happening in Egypt and in the land of the Hittites. In fact, King Marsili from the Hittite regions wrote many lamentations about a plague that came from Egypt up to the Hittite territory that was so severe that like half of the population died. In fact, most people believe that it was one of the things that led to the Bronze Age collapse in like 1170 BCE was the fall of the Hittite Empire as well as other empires, and then the infiltration of like the Sea Peoples and whatnot. So the long and short of it is both plagues and Semitic speaking people originating from Egypt, that there's like some historical kernels of truth there, right?
How big is the kernel? Because kernels are tiny.
Well,
But you're talking about it, and it makes me think that all this happened.
well, the Hyksos people invading Egypt and then being expelled from Egypt is a fact.
Okay. Then that's the Bible right there.
Well, the question is, can you identify the Hyksos people with the Hebrews? Right? I think that the Hyksos people most likely had a genetic relationship with the ancient Hebrews, even if they weren't identical. They shared like a cultural identity and probably quite a bit of genetics. I do think that the Hicks, just like Tel El Hammam is probably the catalyst for the Sodom narrative. I think that the expulsion of the Hyksos is the catalyst for the Exodus narrative. The only thing is, like, I believe that the Exodus narrative is only a kernel of truth and a lot of mythology. I don't believe that like a character named Moses was hand selected by God to go into Egypt and then send all these plagues. And
so Exodus is going to be another book where you tell me how none of this happened.
No, I don't believe that.
You just said that.
Well, I don't believe that Moses existed, but we have a lot of good reason to believe that there was a people group, a Semitic people group that left Egypt and dwelt in the desert. Even the Greek historians write about it.
Well, so what would be so bad about saying that these Hyksos were the Israelites?
Well, because we don't know they were.
Yeah, but what would be so bad about it?
I'm not saying they'd be bad about it. I'm saying I wouldn't make the connection unless we have evidence to make that connection. Like, so you've got two schools of thought, right? So like a lot of Christians will believe, well, it matches the Bible until archaeology says it doesn't. And I come from the opposite side where I say, I actually probably agree with archaeology. And when the archaeology agrees with the Bible, then I say that the Bible is right.
Okay. Makes
So
sense, right?
it's just the opposite end of the spectrum. There are items in the Exodus narrative that match archaeology, but there are a lot that don't, right? So I would say that it preserves a kernel of historical truth, even if it does take on like a mythological life form of its own afterwards.
All right. Well, we'll lot to talk about, I presume.
Yeah, there's a lot there, and maybe at that we should end it.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground. It's 9 o'clock, so we've been live for a couple hours.
2 hours, exactly.
2 hours. So, guys, if you've got more questions or you think that there are some answers we missed or some items in Genesis that are noteworthy, leave them in the comments. We're not claiming to be experts on any of these things. We're just exploring the text,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But I think that exploring the text, especially with a friend, where you can ask critical questions openly, I think it's important. I think if you just rely on your pastor to read it for you and tell you what it says, I don't think that you end up in a good position.
And you also don't read much of the Bible, huh?
No, you really
I
don't.
mean, how many times have you been to church and you're like, I remember this? You know, they just go over the same sanitized, safe verses.
Every time.
They don't have to actually explain much.
Yep.
Yeah.
All the time. Anyways, guys, thank you so much for being here, and we'll be back in another week. We're going to start Exodus. It's going to be exciting.
Yeah, so exciting.
All right, have a great